If we look closely at the present standoff between Washington and Moscow, it is tempting to treat it as a sudden crisis born of recent provocations. But in truth, this moment is the latest chapter in a much older story, one that began long before most of us were alive. The United States and Russia have been circling each other for generations, bound together not by shared trust, but by a recurring pattern of suspicion and competition. It is a rhythm that history has played before in the long, tense decades of the Cold War, when the world lived in the shadow of nuclear brinkmanship and ideological rivalry. Even though the Soviet Union collapsed more than 30 years ago, the psychological residue of that rivalry never fully evaporated. Old narratives have a way of surviving, waiting for the right conditions to resurface. These tensions are not purely about territory, military capability, or even ideology. They are about memory, the collective memory of nations. In psychology, we know that unresolved conflicts tend to repeat themselves, not because the facts are identical, but because the emotional patterns remain unbroken. Nations, like individuals, carry the weight of their past. Washington remembers the threat of Soviet expansion, and Moscow remembers the humiliation and instability of the post-Soviet years. Both sides interpret the other's actions through a lens colored by these memories, turning even defensive moves into perceived acts of aggression. If you strip away the names, the borders, and the political labels, what you see is a universal human tendency, the inability to fully let go of a rivalry that once defined you. The Cold War was not just a geopolitical contest, it was an identity. The United States defined itself as the defender of democracy against an authoritarian superpower. The Soviet Union defined itself as the vanguard of an alternative world order resisting Western dominance. And while the Soviet Union is gone, the identity struggle remains, repurposed for a new era. From a philosophical perspective, this is the tragic loop of power politics. The more two sides distrust each other, the more they act in ways that confirm that distrust. This is what political theorists call a security dilemma, a situation in which measures meant to increase safety only make the other side feel more threatened, prompting them to respond in kind. The result is a self-perpetuating cycle, one that is difficult to break precisely because each side believes it is acting defensively. Recognizing this pattern is not about excusing aggression, it is about seeing the deeper mechanics of conflict. If history has taught us anything, it is that these patterns do not end on their own. They end when one or both sides has the courage to step outside the rhythm, to break the script that history has handed them. And that is the challenge before us now, to refuse to be mere actors in a play written decades ago, and instead become the authors of something new, before the old script reaches its final, catastrophic scene. When most people think of conflict between great powers, they imagine tanks crossing borders or missiles streaking through the sky. But in the modern era, confrontation rarely begins with open fire. Instead, it unfolds across multiple dimensions at once: military posturing, economic pressure, cyber warfare, and information manipulation. This is not a battlefield in the traditional sense. It is a strategic chessboard where every move is calculated to unsettle, weaken, or outmaneuver the opponent without triggering full-scale war. The United States and Russia are both masters of this game. Military deployments and exercises serve as messages just as much as preparations, signals designed to project strength, reassure allies, and unsettle adversaries. Economic sanctions have become weapons in their own right, aiming to squeeze the lifelines of the other side's economy without firing a shot. In cyberspace, the conflict is even more ambiguous: state-backed hackers probing systems, disrupting infrastructure, and planting seeds of doubt about the security of everything from power grids to elections. The complexity here lies in the fact that each move exists in two worlds at once, the practical and the symbolic. A missile defense system is not just hardware, it is a statement. A round of sanctions is not merely a financial penalty, it is a declaration of moral judgment. And in this interplay, perception often matters more than reality. A move that seems cautious in Washington may be seen as threatening in Moscow, and vice versa. That gap in perception is not a technical error, it is the beating heart of the problem. At its core, this is a struggle between security and dominance. Every nation claims to act in the name of security, but the line between protecting what is ours and expanding what we control is razor thin and often invisible to those making the moves. This is where the philosophical danger lies. Power is rarely content with stability alone. Once a nation becomes strong enough to protect itself, it is tempted to shape the world in ways that further secure its position, even if that means encroaching on the space of others. From a psychological perspective, this kind of strategic competition triggers the same instincts we see in interpersonal rivalries. No one wants to appear weak, every concession feels like a loss, every gain by the other side feels like a threat. The game becomes less about finding balance and more about ensuring the other side never gets the upper hand. It is an exhausting logic, one that keeps both players moving pieces long after they've forgotten why the game began in the first place. The danger is that on this chessboard, the pieces are real lives, real economies, and real futures. The moves may be subtle, but the consequences are anything but. The question is not whether either side can win, it is whether the game itself can be transformed before it reaches a point where there are no winners at all. Every conflict is fought on two fronts, the physical and the psychological. Long before soldiers march or sanctions bite, there is a battle for meaning, a struggle to define the story of what is happening and why. For both the United States and Russia, this narrative warfare is as vital as any military maneuver, because it shapes not only how their own citizens see the conflict, but how the rest of the world interprets it. Each side crafts its national narrative with meticulous care. In Washington, the prevailing story is one of defending democratic values against aggression, of standing as a bulwark for freedom in a dangerous world. In Moscow, the narrative is framed around resisting Western encroachment, protecting sovereignty, and reclaiming a rightful place on the global stage after decades of perceived humiliation. These are not just talking points for press conferences, they are identity-shaping myths reinforced through political speeches, state media, cultural references, and even the selective memory of history textbooks. From a psychological perspective, these narratives serve a powerful function. They simplify a complex reality into a clear moral framework, making it easier for people to align emotionally with their leaders' decisions. They transform abstract geopolitical strategies into personal, almost moral obligations. When you believe your nation's actions are the only defense against chaos or oppression, compromise begins to look like betrayal. The danger here is that once a narrative takes hold, it becomes self-reinforcing. Every new event is interpreted through its lens. If a rival sends troops to a border, it is proof of their aggression. If we send troops to a border, it is a necessary precaution. This selective perception is not the result of propaganda alone. It is a cognitive bias deeply rooted in human psychology. We are wired to protect the stories we tell ourselves because those stories protect our sense of identity. Philosophically, this raises a troubling question: how do you resolve a conflict when both sides believe they are the hero of the story? In literature, the resolution often comes when one character undergoes a moment of self-realization, seeing the world through the other's eyes. In geopolitics, such moments are rare because the political cost of admitting complexity is high. Leaders gain more from affirming their own narrative than from acknowledging that the truth might be more tangled than their citizens would like to hear. And so, the narratives harden, versus them, thinking deepens, and the possibility for genuine understanding diminishes. Breaking this cycle requires more than diplomacy. It requires a willingness to question the stories we cling to ask whether they serve peace or simply preserve pride. Because in the end, the most dangerous weapon in any conflict is not the missile or the sanction. It is the story that convinces a nation that it has nothing left to talk about. In theory, diplomacy is the art of turning conflict into conversation, of finding common ground before differences spiral out of control. In practice, especially in times like these, it often feels like a language that both sides have forgotten how to speak. The United States and Russia still engage in talks, still issue statements about channels of communication, but beneath the formalities there is a profound absence of trust. And without trust, words become little more than tactical maneuvers. Part of the problem lies in timing. Diplomacy works best when it is proactive, when leaders engage early to prevent tensions from hardening into confrontation. Right now, the opposite is happening. Dialogue is reactive, born only after each side has already taken steps the other finds threatening. By the time the diplomats sit down, the political cost of compromise is already high, and the room for genuine flexibility is small. What emerges are statements designed for domestic audiences rather than genuine problem solving. There is also the matter of leadership styles. Personalities matter more in diplomacy than most people realize. A leader who thrives on symbolic defiance will approach negotiations as a stage for projecting strength, not as a workshop for building trust. Each handshake, each carefully chosen word, becomes part of a performance meant to reassure allies and warn rivals. That performative layer may be politically necessary, but it often comes at the expense of authenticity. And without authenticity, even the most carefully crafted agreements feel fragile, waiting for the next crisis to unravel them. Psychologically, this is where the paradox of diplomacy reveals itself. The moments when dialogue is most necessary are often the moments when both sides feel least able to risk it. Fear of being perceived as weak can override the fear of war. In the security dilemma we discussed earlier, each side's defensive move looks aggressive to the other. In the realm of diplomacy, each side's attempt at dialogue can be seen as a trap or a sign of desperation. From a philosophical standpoint, this raises an uncomfortable truth. Diplomacy is not simply about exchanging proposals, it is about the courage to enter a conversation knowing you might have to change your own position. And in an era where national narratives are rigid and political incentives reward defiance, that courage is in short supply. The result is a form of communication that looks functional on the surface but is hollow underneath. Talks that are more about buying time, managing optics, or shifting blame than genuinely reducing danger. In such an environment, even the right words can fail, because the ears on the other side are listening for confirmation of suspicion, not for openings to trust. If there is to be any hope of breaking this deadlock, diplomacy will have to reclaim its original purpose. Not as a shield for pride, but as a bridge across fear, because the real danger is not that words will fail, but that silence will win. When two major powers lock horns, the tremors are felt far beyond their own borders. The current tensions between the United States and Russia are not isolated. They are sending ripples through a global system that is already shifting in unpredictable ways. Allies recalibrate their commitments. Neutral states weigh the risks of staying neutral. Rising powers from Beijing to New Delhi are watching closely, not just to see who wins, but to determine how this struggle might open new opportunities for influence. What we are witnessing is more than a bilateral dispute. It is a stress test for the entire architecture of international relations. For decades, much of the world operated in the gravitational pull of either Washington or Moscow. Then came a period of American predominance after the Cold War. But today, the order is less clear and more players are stepping onto the stage. This is the essence of a multipolar world, one where no single nation can unilaterally shape the rules and where competition is as much about influence as it is about direct confrontation. Philosophically, this shift changes the stakes of the US-Russia dynamic. When the Cold War was in full swing, the conflict was largely binary. Each side tried to contain the other. In a multipolar environment, however, every move between two great powers has third and fourth consequences. A sanction designed to punish Russia may push it closer to China. A show of military strength in Eastern Europe might reassure NATO allies, but unsettle partners in other regions who fear being caught in the middle. From a psychological perspective, uncertainty is the defining emotion of this moment. Nations, like individuals, crave predictability because predictability allows for planning. The less predictable the world order becomes, the more each state is tempted to hedge, forming temporary alliances, keeping options open, sometimes playing both sides. This opportunism is not necessarily malicious, it is a survival strategy in a system where the rules are being rewritten in real time. And yet, uncertainty also creates space for possibility. When no single power dominates, smaller states can exert influence in ways that were previously unthinkable. Regional coalitions can emerge, unexpected mediators can step forward, and unconventional solutions to old problems can gain traction. But this requires vision, a willingness to see beyond the immediate contest and imagine a framework where power is balanced by responsibility. The danger is that without such vision, multipolarity becomes not a more stable world, but a more volatile one, fragmented, distrustful, and prone to sudden shocks. The United States and Russia may be the most visible players in this drama, but the rest of the world is not just watching. It is reacting, adjusting, and in some cases, quietly reshaping the rules. And that is the deeper truth. The outcome of this standoff will not be written by two nations alone. It will be written by the entire chorus of global actors who decide, in moments of crisis, whether to amplify conflict or to insist on balance. Escalation is rarely a single leap. It is almost always a series of small, seemingly logical steps that add up to something no one intended. In the tensions between the United States and Russia, we can trace these steps: a military exercise here, a retaliatory sanction there, a sharp exchange of words in the press, a troop deployment meant as a signal rather than a threat. Each move is justified internally as necessary, even prudent. And yet, from the other side's perspective, it is proof of hostility. This is the security dilemma in motion. A psychological trap in which defensive measures look like aggression, and so each side feels compelled to answer in kind. What makes this trap so powerful is not just fear, but pride. Nations, like individuals, struggle to back down when their strength is questioned. The human mind is wired to avoid the pain of loss more intensely than it seeks the pleasure of gain. In political terms, this means leaders often fear the appearance of weakness more than they fear the cost of continued confrontation. This fear drives decisions that escalate risk, even when cooler analysis might recommend restraint. There is also a deeper, more primal force at work: the need for control. In times of uncertainty, the instinct to do something can override the wisdom of patience. This is as true for governments as it is for individuals. The problem is that in high-stakes conflicts, doing something often means making moves that close off future options, hardening the path toward a collision. History offers moments where restraint prevailed despite immense pressure, moments when leaders recognized that the long-term cost of escalation outweighed the short-term gain of proving a point. These moments are easy to overlook because they lack the drama of confrontation. They are remembered not for what happened, but for what didn't. Yet they are the quiet victories that have spared the world from disaster. Philosophically, restraint is not the absence of action, it is the conscious choice to act in a way that preserves possibility. It requires the discipline to see beyond the immediate emotional reward of winning and to value the less visible achievement of preventing catastrophe. This is a kind of strength that is easy to praise in theory, but difficult to practice in the heat of political rivalry. The challenge now is whether both the United States and Russia, standing on the edge of a more dangerous chapter, can summon that discipline. The forces pushing them toward escalation, fear, pride, mistrust, are ancient and deeply human. But so too is the capacity for foresight, for recognizing that no victory is worth the ashes it leaves behind. If we forget this, history will once again remind us in the harshest way possible. But if we remember it, if we choose restraint over reaction, we may yet prove that wisdom, not force, is the highest form of power.